Welcome to Crisis in Perception. This is the show where we try to understand the systems that shape our world, one book at a time. And today, we're digging into the American criminal legal system by looking through the lens of a truly landmark book, Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy.
Now, if you've read Just Mercy, you know it's packed with these incredibly powerful human stories. But what we're going to focus on is how it also works as a kind of blueprint. It shows us how the machine of justice is actually put together. You know, what's going on under the hood, not just what comes out the other end.
So to really get a grip on this, we're going to use one big metaphor for this whole explainer. I want you to forget the classic image of the scales of justice for a minute. Instead, picture something totally different. A high-speed assembly line. A machine that's not built for careful, slow deliberation, but for one thing and one thing only. Pure speed.
Okay, so let's start with that blueprint. How is this machine actually built? Well, it's designed for one thing above all else, and that's throughput. Just getting cases in the door and getting them out the other side as fast as humanly possible. Think of it like this. The whole process is a pipeline, right? It's an assembly line. Arrest? That's just intake, getting the raw materials onto the belt. Prosecution? That's the processing stage. Adjudication, the trial or the plea deal, that's the big rubber stamp. And sentencing, well, that's just packaging and shipping. Every single step is a handoff, and it's all designed to do one thing: keep that line moving.
And this is where you really see the huge gap between what we think the system is and what it actually is. We have this ideal of a search for truth, but the reality, it's an adversarial process. It's about winners and losers. And when you have this massive imbalance in resources, the prosecution on one side, the defense on the other, the goal isn't really accuracy anymore. It becomes about finality, about closing the case.
And this is the consequence of that design. As Bryan Stevenson puts it so powerfully, things like poverty and racial bias, they aren't bugs in the system, they are features. They actually create what he calls a presumption of guilt that feeds the assembly line, which leads to a system that is at its core defined by error.
All right, so if this whole machine is built for speed, you gotta ask, what keeps it running so fast? What's the fuel? Well, the answer is pretty simple: incentives. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. For almost everyone working inside the system, the main way their performance is measured is closure. How many dockets did you clear? How many convictions did you secure? Those are the metrics for success. And that creates this immense, overwhelming pressure to just resolve cases, not necessarily to get them right.
So all that pressure for closure leads to something Stevenson calls a disturbing indifference to the actual truth. I mean, think about it. When speed is the main goal, things like unreliable verdicts or unfair prosecutions, they just become acceptable costs of doing business. This is exactly why over 90% of cases end in a plea bargain. It's just the fastest way to get a case off the docket.
Now you're probably thinking, well, what about appeals? Doesn't that catch all the mistakes? And that's a fair question. But in our assembly line metaphor, the appeals process is the quality control gate. And here's the kicker. It's designed to be incredibly narrow, procedurally difficult, and super expensive to even open. So what happens? Most of the products that come off that line, even the ones we know are faulty, they never ever get re-inspected.
And all of this brings us to the absolute core question of this whole explainer. When this system produces a wrongful conviction, is that a mistake, an accident, or is it actually an expected outcome?
Let me put it another way. If you build an assembly line that's designed for nothing but speed, and you give it a really weak quality control process at the end, when it spits out a faulty product, is that really an accident? Or is that just a predictable, inevitable result of how you designed it in the first place? This right here is the crisis in perception. It's that moment when we look at the steady stream of wrongful convictions and other errors coming out of this system, and we see them as just a series of random, isolated accidents. We fail to see the pattern. We're misreading the predictable output of a machine as just a random bug.
So, the big question is, why does a system like this stick around? Well, it's because it does two things really, really well. First, it delivers a very visible sense of order and control. And second, it shifts the true costs of all its mistakes. We're talking wrongful convictions, ruined lives. It pushes all that onto poor, vulnerable groups who just don't have the power to fight back.
But of course, this assembly line doesn't just run on its own. It's not operating in a vacuum. It's plugged into a much larger power grid of other social and political systems that feed it.
I mean, just think about all the forces feeding into it. You've got elections and budgets that dictate the priorities for prosecutors and judges. You've got media cycles that create this huge demand for tough on-crime policies, which just cranks up the speed on the assembly line. Poverty and segregation create immense pressure on people to just accept a plea deal, any deal. You have entire economies built around private prisons that need a steady supply of inmates. And woven through all of it is a long history of racial bias that fuels that presumption of guilt we talked about.
And all of that brings us right back to Bryan Stevenson and his work. Because look, understanding the mechanics of the system is absolutely critical. But it's only half the story. We have to look closer. We have to understand the profound human cost of running this machine. Because at the end of the day, this is the challenge Stevenson leaves us with. He says the true measure of our character, as a society, as a people, is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. This isn't just some abstract intellectual puzzle, you know? It's a deeply moral question. Honestly, the best way to really grasp the human cost of this machine is to read Just Mercy. It's brilliant at connecting the individual stories, the real people caught in the gears, to the larger design of the system itself. You can find it in bookstores or borrow it from your local library. It is an absolutely essential read.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.